guys, it's Angelo, and with patch 8.1.5 already out, and with the new raid, the Battle for Dazar'alor, out and about and in full effect, welcome to my Shadow Priest guide for World of Warcraft's patch 8.1.5. Not too many things have changed since patch 8.0, but the Shadow Priest did see some very interesting gameplay changes, most of them very positive, which makes the new raid tier a very interesting one and a very competitive one for us as well. Now, if you want a rundown specifically on the changes which the spec had received previously, be sure to check out my Shadow Priest changes video for patch 8.1 with a link popping up on your screen as I speak. In this guide, as in all of my other guides, we will go over our stat priority, our talents, and which ones you will want to be going for in various situations, your spell priorities in different scenarios, and the pros and cons of the spec. That being said, if you want to discuss anything Priest or World of Warcraft related with fellow viewers or myself, be sure to join our Discord server with the link in the description, of course. Now, that being said, without any further ado, let's go right ahead and have a look. First, let's look at our stat priority. Not much has changed here, but a few things should be addressed nonetheless. At this point in the game, where gear starts to become very strong, intellect is not really your main stat anymore. Now, you will have intellect on any item you find, except for some trinkets and any ring you equip, which means we can pretty much pull intellect out of the equation. However, this will be important when you're comparing different items at different item levels, but more on that in just a second. Haste and Critical Strike are almost equally strong, with Critical Strike pulling slightly ahead with high gear. After these two come Mastery, which increases the damage of most of our main rotational spells, and lastly we have Versatility, which is simply a flat damage, healing, and survivability increase. Ideally, you will want to aim for items with Critical Strike and Haste, arguably with Critical Strike as the main stat on that item, but ultimately the difference would be very minute either way. When comparing items, you will find that some items with a lower item level result in more damage than the item with a higher item level. For example, if you have Bracers at item level 400 with Haste and Critical Strike, they will be better than Bracers of item level 405 with Versatility and Mastery. This is even more interesting when looking at a 390 Bracer with perhaps Critical Strike and Haste and a socket slot, which can potentially make this item stronger than a 405 counterpart without a socket. Try sticking to the stat priority and you should be perfectly fine this patch. Next up, let's discuss our talents for this content. Our talents see a bit less variety than in the previous patch, but this is due to the fact that other playstyles are not as effective anymore, especially so now that we have a lot more Critical Strike and Haste than we did before. The only talent row that will really see any shifting around is the level 45 talent row, but for your level 15 row, Shadow Word Void will be your go-to talent in raids and Mythic Plus. Body and Soul reign supreme in your level 30 row, with Intangibility, a newly added talent in patch 8.1.5, having its use for fights where movement is very predictable and incoming damage can be very high. In our level 45 talent row, all three choices are competitive in their given niche. For most raid encounters, you will be playing with Twist of Fate, with the exceptions being Opulence, where you will aim for Dark Void, and the Conclave of the Chosen, where Misery will be your go-to talent. In Mythic Plus, Dark Void will be superior in most cases, especially when playing with the Azerite traits Searing Dialogue or Death Throes. Misery, however, is also pretty strong in Mythic Plus, especially when playing with Spiteful Apparitions as your Azerite trait or even traits, and in weeks where you will be playing with high Tyrannical keys. Now the reason for this is that Misery is a solid talent for a lot of bosses where you have multiple targets to hit in Mythic Plus, while also being a good talent for trash mobs, again especially with Spiteful Apparitions. Twist of Fate is very strong when only focusing on boss damage, but because of that reason it struggles to find a solid hold in Mythic Plus, as trash damage matters here as well. In your level 60 talent row, Last Word or Psychic Horror will be the talents you will want to go for, while Auspicious Spirits reign supreme in your level 75 talent row, due to the fact that most of us are above 18% crit at this point, making it better in essentially any situation than both Shadow Crash and Shadow Word Death. Your level 90 talent row has Lingering Insanity seeing a comeback this tier, with it being generally the best choice. The haste buff it gives is very strong, and is arguably only weakened in a Mythic Plus situation, where you need to run from trash pack to trash pack, thus of course dropping the buff, which is where Mindbender can pull ahead. If you have an experienced tank, this will not be a problem though, so even here you should go for Lingering Insanity in most cases. And finally, we have our level 100 talent row, where Legacy of the Void is your best choice. The faster Void form availability and activation, as well as the spell damage bonus from 5% in Void form, makes this talent very strong. Dark Ascension can still be used, however only in situations where you will be required to pull off a lot of immediate damage onto a lot of enemies. This will only be the case in Mythic Plus, but even here, fights usually take a bit longer, thus making Legacy of the Void stronger. On top of that, Dark Ascension will not be ready for every trash pack, meaning that Legacy of the Void will generally be much more worthwhile than Dark Void. Now let's talk about spell priorities. Here, there are pretty much no changes in comparison to patch 8.0, because nothing within our active rotation, or rather our spell priorities, has really been changed. However, with more Azurite traits at your disposal, our rotation, or spell priorities, just make you feel as if the gameplay is getting faster and faster, and more engaging the higher stacks of Void form you are able to pull off. In order not to flood you with too much information, I will assume that you know all of the spells on screen, and if not, of course, you can always review them in your spellbook. Be sure to stick to the spell priority, and don't forget to swap to Mindseer rather than Mindflay if you have 3 targets or more in range of Mindseer. Also, keep in mind that immediately upon entering Void form, you can throw out your first Void Bolt, so essentially you want to keep smashing Void Eruption until your first Void Bolt is on cooldown. Finally, we get to the pros and cons of the spec. The Shadow Priest fits perfectly into the fighting style of the Battle for dazar'alor, and with recent buffs in patch 8.1, is also very competitive again in Mythic Plus. Honestly, there's currently nothing we are that bad at, as we're strong in single target, multi-targeted cleave fights of course, and AoE. We still don't have an instant damage capability like those of other classes, like the Demon Hunter or the Frost Mage, but with a short, yet given ramp-up time, a good Shadow Priest does insane amounts of damage. The only real con this patch would be our movement restrictions. The Battle for dazar'alor requires a lot of movement on a lot of bosses, and having to actually run out of every ability thrown at you, and having to use a precious global cooldown for a small speed buff when using Body and Soul, is certainly something we're having to deal with. But on the contrary, it'd be a bit unfair if we'd have abilities to move greater distances quickly, like mages and warlocks. Now, what do you think? Do you enjoy the current version of the Shadow Priest? What would you like to see changed by the developers, and why? I would be excited to know what you have to say. I hope my break from YouTube didn't trouble you guys too much. I had a lot to do in real life, meaning my upload schedule was very difficult to maintain. Nonetheless, thank you so much for watching. Special thanks to my supporters over at Patreon, and a very special thanks to Robin and Conan, and all of the other moderators on Discord for being so engaging and helpful with our community. Now, I hope this guide helped you out, and if it did, feel free to leave a like. Now, have a good one, my friends, enjoy patch 8.1.5, and I will see you all in the next one.